The hall smelled like ozone and old starlight. Sergeant Darren Voss stood at the center of the conclave chamber with 40 alien dignitaries watching him breathe, and a gun pressed against the back of his skull. "You were captured in restricted space," said the arbiter, a 7-foot insectoid diplomat whose mandibles clicked between every syllable. "You carried no diplomatic registry. You spoke no recognized code. By the law of the conclave, you are either a spy or a ghost. Spies are executed. Ghosts are worse." Voss kept his hands visible, kept his breathing even. He had been in bad rooms before, but none of them had ceilings that moved like living tissue or floors that hummed with something that felt disturbingly close to a heartbeat. "I'm a courier," he said. "Independent. I was contracted to deliver a data cylinder to the Beleth station and my nav system failed inside the buffer zone. I have documentation. Documentation can be forged." "So can intentions," Voss said. "But here I am, unarmed and talking instead of dead, which tells me you want something." The arbiter went still. That was the thing about high-functioning alien intelligence. They didn't fidget when surprised. They became architecture. A door opened at the far end of the chamber. Not a sliding panel or a mechanical hinge. The walls simply parted like water, and through it walked someone Voss had only seen in intelligence briefings marked 3 levels above his clearance. Queen Soraya of the Velhari. She stood roughly human in shape, which was where the similarity ended. Her skin shifted between deep violet and black depending on how the light struck her. Her eyes were pale silver, no pupil, and she moved like gravity was a suggestion she decided to entertain. 2 royal guards flanked her in silence, wearing black armor that absorbed light completely. They weren't watching Voss. They were watching everything else. She stopped 10 feet away. The gun at the back of Voss's head didn't move. "You are human," she said. Her voice was low and even, and it landed somewhere behind his sternum. "I have studied your species for 11 years. I find you confusing." "Most of us find ourselves confusing," Voss said. Something shifted in her expression. Not a smile. Something quieter. "The arbiter wants you executed," she said. "The Conclave Security Council wants you held for interrogation. 3 of the outering delegates want you released as a goodwill gesture toward Earth's new trade proposal." She tilted her head exactly 3 degrees. "I am the only vote that matters in this chamber. And I have not yet decided." "What would help you decide?" Voss asked. She studied him for a long moment. "Honesty, which is a commodity your species trades in rarely." The gun at the back of his head was making his neck ache. The air in the chamber had gone completely still. Even the ceiling had stopped moving. "Ask me something," Voss said. "I'll answer it straight. Why are you not afraid?" He thought about that. The honest answer wasn't the brave one. But she'd asked for honesty. "I am afraid," he said. "I'm just more afraid of showing it in a room full of people who'll use it against me. That's not courage. That's survival arithmetic." Queen Soraya looked at him with those pale silver eyes for a count of 5 full seconds. Then she raised her hand and the gun at Voss's skull disappeared. He heard movement behind him, a guard stepping back, but he didn't turn. "Leave us," she said. The arbiter made a sound of protest. She didn't look at him. He left. The delegates filed out in order of rank, which told Voss more about conclave power structure in 30 seconds than a month of intelligence briefings had. When the chamber emptied, only the 2 silent guards remained, stationed at the far corners like black statues. "You are going to be tried," she said. "That is not something I can prevent without creating a political incident that would cost the Velhari 3 treaty negotiations we cannot afford to lose. But, before the trial begins, I am permitted to offer you one decision under the Accord of Voluntary Submission." Voss waited. "You may choose a single representative to stand with you during proceedings. That representative may speak on your behalf, challenge testimony, and request clemency directly to the tribunal chair." She paused. "You may choose any conclave citizen, any species, any rank. If your chosen representative agrees to stand with you, their word carries legal weight no prosecutor can dismiss." The air in the chamber felt thinner than it had before. "Any citizen," he repeated. "Any," she confirmed. Voss looked at her directly, at the queen of the most powerful civilization currently in diplomatic contact with Earth, at the one person in this chamber whose word actually meant anything, at the only individual in 40 light-years who had just ordered a gun away from his head because he'd answered one question honestly. "You," he said. The chamber went completely silent. Queen Soraya did not move. Her guards did not move. The living ceiling above them did not move. Even the low harmonic hum of the floor seemed to drop a register. She stared at him and said nothing. The silence lasted long enough that Voss began to wonder if he'd made a fatal error. Not a dramatic one. No one was raising weapons or moving toward him. But the quality of the silence had changed. It had weight. It pressed. He stood with his hands at his sides and waited. That was all he could do. He'd made the choice. There was no threading it back through the needle. One of the guards in the corner moved. Just a fraction, a shift of weight, the faintest adjustment of stance, and then stilled again. Voss catalogued it without looking directly at them. In his 6 years as a courier operating in contested space, he had learned that what guards did in moments of institutional shock was more revealing than anything an official statement could produce. These two were trained to silence and control. The fact that even one of them had moved told him that his answer had been genuinely unexpected. Queen Soraya finally turned away from him. She walked to the far edge of the chamber and stood with her back to him, looking at a curved viewport that showed open space, a dense starfield and the distant, cold light of the system's outer planets. "You understand what you have asked," she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. You have asked the sovereign ruler of the Velhari Compact, in front of her personal guard, to submit herself as a legal representative to a human courier on trial in a conclave proceeding. She paused. You understand the political implications of that. I understand that you are the only person in this building whose word the tribunal cannot ignore, Voss said. I understand that everyone else I could have chosen would have been leveraged, pressured, or quietly told to underperform. I understand that you asked me for honesty and I'm giving it to you. You're not a convenient choice. You're the only choice that gives me an actual chance. She turned back to face him. The light from the viewport caught the violet shifting beneath her skin in slow, deep pulses. And if I refuse, she asked, then I lose the trial. Probably get sentenced to a decade in a conclave detention facility, which I understand is exactly as unpleasant as it sounds. Earth lodges a formal protest that goes nowhere. The trade proposal stalls. Everyone moves on. That does not seem to concern you sufficiently. It concerns me plenty, Voss said. But catastrophizing doesn't change the math. She came back toward him, slowly, with that same quality of movement, like someone who had simply decided that space would accommodate her rather than the other way around. She stopped closer this time, close enough that he could see the fine geometric patterns beneath her skin, dark lines that shifted and reformed in slow constellations. You said you were afraid, she said quietly, and that you hide it for survival. Yes. Are you afraid now? He thought about the honest answer again. More than before, he said, but not of the trial. Her expression did something complicated. The geometric lines beneath her skin moved faster for just a moment, a brief internal storm, and then settled. What are you afraid of? She asked. Voss was quiet for a moment. He'd spent 6 years navigating contested space by being honest when it mattered and careful when it didn't. This was a moment where the two overlapped in a way he hadn't anticipated when he walked into this chamber. That I just asked something of you that cost more than a legal proceeding, he said. And I didn't fully understand that until I saw you go quiet. One of the guards shifted again. More than before. Just barely. Queen Soraya looked at him for a long time. The accord of voluntary submission, she said at last, has existed for 400 years. In that time, it has been invoked 11 times. In 9 of those cases, the requested representative declined. In the remaining 2, the representative was a low-ranking diplomat who agreed in order to advance their own political position. She paused. No one has ever invoked it to request a sovereign. I know, Voss said. You researched this before you were brought to this chamber. I researched conclave law 6 months ago when I took the contract that brought me into the buffer zone. I didn't know I'd need any of it. I read fast when I'm scared. Something in her face changed. Not a smile, still not that, but something adjacent. A yielding of architecture. If I stand as your representative, she said, it will create a record. That record will be studied, interpreted, used by every political faction in the conclave as evidence of Velhari positioning on human relations. It will generate diplomatic turbulence that will last years. I know, Voss said. And you still choose me. You're still the only choice that gives me a real chance. She turned away again, briefly, and, when she turned back, she had made some internal decision that he could see in the new stillness of her bearing. She looked at him the way he imagined someone looked at a problem they had solved and were now deciding whether the solution was worth the cost. There is a condition, she said. Voss waited. If I stand for you, and you are found innocent, which I believe you will be, because your story is too specific and too unglamorous to be fabricated, you will owe me an honest answer to one question, asked at a time of my choosing, about anything I wish to know. That's a significant blank check, Voss said. Yes, she agreed. It is. He thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. Done, he said. Queen Soraya looked at him once more, and this time the pause had a different texture. It wasn't shock or calculation. It was something closer to recognition, the look of someone who had encountered a variable their models hadn't accounted for and were deciding how to feel about that. You will be held in diplomatic quarters tonight, she said. The trial begins at first system light. She turned to leave, and, then, stopped without looking back. Sergeant Voss. Yes. You are not wrong that I am the only viable choice, she said quietly. But I do not believe that is the only reason you chose me. She walked through the wall of water and was gone. The 2 guards remained for exactly 10 seconds, looking at him with the impenetrable black of their visors. Then, they, too, left. The chamber door closed behind them with a sound like a held breath finally, released. Voss stood alone in the center of the living floor and the breathing ceiling and let himself be afraid for exactly 30 seconds. Then, he straightened his jacket, turned toward the door a guard would come to escort him through, and started calculating. The diplomatic quarters were better than a detention cell and more isolating than either. The room was elegant by Velhari standards, curved walls, bioluminescent panels that shifted from blue to warm amber as the station's artificial night cycle began, a sleeping surface that was more cloud than mattress. There was no window. There was no terminal. There was a small table with food he didn't recognize and water he could identify by sight. Voss ate what seemed least likely to cause an incident and sat on the edge of the sleeping surface with his back straight and his mind working. The trial would center on 3 things: his presence in the buffer zone, his lack of diplomatic registry, and the nature of the data cylinder he'd been carrying. The cylinder was the critical piece. He'd been told by his contractor that it contained licensed commercial data, mapping surveys of 3 uninhabited systems that a Beleth Station Minerals Corporation wanted for resource assessment. That was the story. He had no reason, 6 months ago, to believe otherwise. But he'd been thinking about it for hours now, and the timeline didn't fit. No commercial mapping contract justified the route he'd been given. The buffer zone wasn't on the way to Beleth Station, not by any rational navigation. It was a detour, a deliberate one, added to his routing by someone who knew the nav system would accept it without flagging. He had been used. He just didn't know for what. The cylinder had been confiscated on capture. He hadn't seen it since. Whatever was on it was now in Conclave hands, and the trial would presumably revolve around its contents he'd never been permitted to examine. He needed to know what was on it before he walked into that tribunal. He had no terminal.
No contacts. No leverage.
He had one thing, an alien queen who had agreed to stand for him. The door to his quarters opened before he could finish the thought. Not a guard. The entry was too quiet, too deliberate. One of the guards in black armor, but moving differently now. Not stationed. Walking with purpose. The guards stopped inside the door, reached up and removed their helmet. Young. Female by the structural markers he associated with Velhari physiology, though he was aware that was an imprecise framework. Clear violet skin, no geometric undercurrent. Junior, then. Not one of the 2 from the chamber. I am Cadet Leshry, she said. I carry a message from the Queen. Verbal only. I'm listening, Voss said. She says, the cylinder contained navigational data for 3 uninhabited systems, as your contractor told you. It also contained an encrypted secondary layer that neither you nor the contractor's logged personnel had authorization to access. The secondary layer was opened 3 months ago by a party using a forged Velhari diplomatic key. Whatever was added is what the prosecutor will use against you tomorrow. Voss kept his face still. Does she know what was added? She says, that is what you need to help her find. I'm in a locked room, Voss said. The Queen says, you are in a room with a door. And she would like to know what you remember about your contractor. Cadet Leshry waited, helmet in her hands, watching him with the careful attention of someone who had been told this mission mattered without being told why. Voss thought about the contractor, a mid-tier logistics broker named Sona Durl, based on Meridian Station, who had contacted him through a legitimate hiring channel and paid above standard rate. Above standard by exactly enough to not raise immediate alarm, but enough to be noticed in retrospect. He thought about the routing, about the buffer zone detour, about the specific cylinder housing, custom, not standard commercial grade. He thought about a conversation he'd had 6 months ago that he'd filed under unremarkable. A systems trader at a Meridian Station bar who'd asked too many casual questions about Velhari diplomatic security protocols and, then, laughed it off and bought the next round. The person who added the secondary layer wasn't working for the contractor, Voss said slowly. The contractor was a cutout. Someone used a legitimate job to route a compromised cylinder through neutral hands so that if it was intercepted, the trail would stop at me. He looked at Leshry. Someone wanted a forged Velhari diplomatic key inside Conclave jurisdiction. And they wanted it to look like it came from human intelligence services. Leshry's expression didn't change, but her grip on her helmet tightened. Tell her that, Voss said. And tell her I need the name of anyone who filed a transit request through the Meridian Station hub in the 90 days before my contract was issued using a Velhari commercial visa. I will relay it, Leshry said. She replaced her helmet, became architecture again, and left. Voss lay back on the cloud mattress and stared at the bioluminescent ceiling as it shifted toward amber. The picture was taking shape. Someone had framed a human courier to smuggle evidence of a forged Velhari diplomatic key into Conclave space, intending for the Conclave to find it and interpret it as a human intelligence operation against Velhari security. The diplomatic fallout would have been catastrophic. It would have ended Earth's trade proposal and likely poisoned human-Velhari relations for a generation. Someone wanted that war. Or at least that rupture. And, tomorrow, a tribunal that didn't know any of this was going to try to convict him of exactly the crime the frame was designed to suggest. He had one representative. He had 6 hours. He had a thread. He closed his eyes and started pulling it. System light came like a slow tide, the station's panels warming from amber to pale gold as the artificial morning cycle climbed. Voss had not slept. He'd spent the hours organizing everything he knew into a sequence that could be delivered clearly and quickly, because trials and conclave proceedings, according to everything he'd read 6 months ago when he was bored and thorough, moved fast. Evidence first, then testimony, then challenge. The representative spoke after the prosecution rested. He was dressed in the same clothes he'd been captured in. No one had offered alternatives, which either meant oversight or message. Cadet Leshry came for him at first light. She said nothing on the walk through the station's inner corridors, and he said nothing back. The corridors were wide and clean and hummed with the same subsonic frequency as the chamber. The station was alive in some meaningful sense, and it knew he was moving through it. The tribunal chamber was smaller than the conclave hall, built for function rather than theatre. 7 chairs behind a raised arc of white stone, the tribunal panel. A single standing position for the accused. A raised dais to the left for the prosecution, represented by the arbiter from the previous evening, whose mandibles were clicking with what Voss now recognized as restrained satisfaction. And, to his right, the representative's position. Queen Soraya stood there already. She wore different clothing than the previous night, formal, structured, dark, and her 2 personal guards were stationed to her back. She looked at him once when he entered, a quick, measuring look, and, then, returned her attention forward. The chief tribunal member, a tall grey-skinned conclave elder whose species Voss didn't recognize, opened proceedings without ceremony. The prosecution's case was presented in 11 minutes. Voss listened to every word. The arbiter was good, precise, structured, and careful to use the word deliberate whenever possible in connection with Voss's presence in the buffer zone. The cylinder was introduced into evidence. Its contents were summarized. The secondary layer, the forged diplomatic key, was highlighted as the centerpiece. Then, the arbiter said something Voss hadn't anticipated. The secondary layer was accessed on its way to this tribunal by authorized conclave decryption personnel. Within it, they found not merely the forged diplomatic key, but a message, addressed to this tribunal, signed with a Human Intelligence Service authentication code. He paused for effect. The message states that the cylinder was a deliberate delivery, that the forged key is a sample of Velhari security vulnerabilities identified by human intelligence, and that more samples exist and are available for negotiation. The chamber went very still. Voss felt the weight of it land. They'd updated the frame. Whoever was behind this had known the cylinder might be examined before trial and had added a secondary message to make the evidence more damning. He was no longer being tried as an accidental smuggler. He was being tried as an active intelligence operative. He looked at Queen Soraya. She was already looking at him. Her expression was composed and still. But, beneath her skin, the geometric lines were moving fast, faster than he'd seen, a storm running just under the surface. She raised her hand. The representative requests the right to challenge evidence before the prosecution rests, she said. The tribunal chief looked at her for a long moment. Granted. She stepped forward. The authentication code used to sign the secondary message. I would like the tribunal to note its format. Specifically, its generation date, embedded in the first 16 characters. The arbiter went still. Authentication codes issued by Human Intelligence Services, she continued, carry a generation date embedded in their structure. This is standard practice, documented in the Conclave's own intelligence sharing protocols established under the Third Meridian Accord. I request that the tribunal's technical analysts extract and verify that date now, before we proceed. The silence in the chamber was total. The technical analyst at the tribunal's right side, a small, precise-looking individual who had seemed purely administrative until this moment, pulled up the evidence file, ran the extraction, and read the result in a voice that was almost too quiet to hear. Generation date, 14 months ago, the analyst said. Queen Soraya let that sit for 3 full seconds. The Accord of Technical Intelligence Cooperation between the Velhari Compact and the human species was signed 9 months ago, she said. The authentication code format used in this message did not exist in human intelligence infrastructure 14 months ago. It was developed specifically as part of that accord, and issued to human services only after signing. She paused. This code was not created by human intelligence. It was created by someone who had access to Accord documentation before it was finalized, which narrows the field of possible actors to the Conclave's own internal negotiation team and a small number of Velhari diplomatic personnel. The arbiter's mandibles had stopped clicking entirely. I further submit, Queen Soraya said, a transit record from Meridian Station, obtained through Velhari commercial access channels in the last 6 hours, showing that a Conclave diplomatic attaché named Bref Solon filed a transit request through that hub 83 days before the accused received his contract, using a Velhari commercial visa that was later reported stolen. She looked at the tribunal chief directly. Bref Solon is currently assigned to this tribunal as a logistics coordinator. I would suggest you locate him before he becomes unavailable. 3 things happened at once. The tribunal chief stood. 2 Conclave security officers moved toward the coordinator station at the side of the chamber. And the individual in question, small, precise, administrative, bolted for the side door. He didn't make it. The chamber erupted into controlled chaos, the kind that happens when institutions move fast because they have to. Voss stood at the accused position and watched it happen and let himself breathe. Queen Soraya walked back to her position beside him. She did not look triumphant. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. You found it, he said quietly, beneath the noise of the chamber. You pointed me at the thread, she said. I simply pulled it faster than you could from a locked room. The tribunal chief called for order. Got it within 30 seconds, which Voss found impressive. The chief looked at the accused position, then at the representative, then made a decision that was visible in the set of her shoulders before she spoke it aloud. Proceedings are suspended pending investigation of new evidence, she said. The accused is remanded to diplomatic status, not detention status, effective immediately. A pause. The The representative submissions are entered into the permanent record. The arbiter said nothing. His mandibles had not moved since the generation date had been read aloud. The chamber began to empty in the ordered, ranked way Voss had observed before. When most of it had cleared, he stood beside Queen Soraya in the quiet and looked at the empty tribunal ark. "You said I owe you an answer," he said, "to one honest question, asked at a time of your choosing." "I remember," she said. "You can ask it now, if you want." She looked at him. The geometric lines beneath her skin had slowed back to their usual drifting constellation. The storm was over. "I told you last night," she said quietly, "that I did not believe the tribunal's usefulness was the only reason you chose me." "You did," Voss said. "I have not yet asked the question," she said. "But I want you to understand something first." She looked back at the empty chamber, then back at him, and there was something in those pale silver eyes that had not been there the previous evening, not yet formed, not yet named, but present in the way that weather is present before it arrives. "I went silent when you chose me because no one has ever chosen me when they had the option of choosing someone safer. Every alliance I have, every treaty, every agreement, they were made because I am useful or powerful or necessary. Not because someone looked at the full field and said, 'Her.'" Voss said nothing. There was nothing to add that wouldn't diminish it. "My question," Queen Soraya said, "is this." She met his eyes with the full weight of those silver irises, no deflection, no architecture. "When you have the option of leaving, and you will have it once the investigation clears you, will you?" The chamber held its breath around them. Voss thought about the honest answer. The brave one. The one that was both at the same time, which was the hardest kind to find and the only kind she'd accept. "That depends," he said, "on whether the person I chose has questions left she hasn't asked yet." Queen Soraya looked at him for a long count of 5. Then the geometric lines beneath her skin shifted, not the quick storm of before, but something slower and deliberate and new. And, for the first time since he had walked into a room full of aliens with a gun at his head, she smiled. It was quiet. It was careful. It was absolutely worth the cost of everything that had led to it. "I have several," she said.